There it goes. It's going past.
Okay. So are we broadcasting successfully now?
Not yet. It's still, well, it's still moving across the screen here.
Okay.
I would say we are now, Dr. Randy.
Okay. Thank you and good evening. I apologize for our delayed start. We had some technical hiccups with getting our YouTube broadcast to start. But I do now call the June 22nd meeting of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School Board to order. And in opening, I will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would like to start this evening by asking our Assistant Secretary, Michelle Downey, to take a roll call of attendees.
Mr. Ballas?
Here.
Ms. Amino?
Here/present.
Dr. Huff?
Here.
Mr. Cutis?
Present.
Mrs. Lentz?
I think Mrs. Lentz may be on as an attendee rather than as a panelist.
Okay, why don't we see if we can resolve that, but why don't you keep going, Michelle, and then we'll circle back.
Here she comes.
Jen, can you hear us?
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Orsetti?
Present.
Mrs. Walkman?
Present.
Dr. Grandy?
Present.
Mr. Berman?
Present.
Superintendent Palmer?
Present.
All right, is that everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do I add the guests? No.
No. We have 9 voting members this evening. Thank you, Michelle. So we start with a suspension of policies, which is a resolution to suspend policy to meet remotely this evening. Due to the current health crisis and the governor's closure order, all members of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District Board of School Directors will be participating remotely. However, the board's policies impose some requirements for remote participation that are inconsistent with the governor's order. Therefore, I move to adopt the attached resolution to suspend. Do I have a second for this motion?
Second.
Thank you, Jerry. Michelle, could you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Ballas?
Present.
You have to,
Is this on aye or a nay for the resolution?
Oh, yeah, yay.
Ms. Amino?
Aye.
Dr. Huff?
Aye.
Mr. Cutis?
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz?
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti?
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman?
Aye.
Dr. Grandy?
aye.
Yes.
All right. The vote passes 9-0. The suspensions are in place. Please bear with our hiccups this evening. We're getting there. So again, it is worth repeating that under the procedures we're using for this meeting, in which the suspensions now permit, members of the public wishing to address the board have been and continue to be encouraged to call 610-892-3470, extension 1102, to leave the recorded comments for the board, subject to a 3-minute time limit. Any comments left prior to 5 o'clock today have been transcribed and made available to the board, and we will acknowledge them at the appropriate times during the meeting. Those comments left after 5 o'clock, but prior to the end of this meeting this evening will still be transcribed, distributed to the board, and made a part of the record, but will not be acknowledged during the meeting. So, and I will also mention during this time that we will soon be revisiting our plans for future board meetings, but more to come on that. So that takes us to the superintendent's report. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Palmer for that.
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. I have two items that I'd like to focus on this evening, and the first one pertains to our agenda. Included on the agenda tonight is a recommendation for 2 contracts with the Teaching Tolerance Project. We have arranged for 5 particular trainings for our staff, and I'd like to highlight what they are. In a perfect world, we would not be doing virtual training, but we don't know when entities will be able to do on-site training for our staff. So 3 of the trainings that we're recommending are virtual, and 2 are hopeful that we'll be able to do them on-site. So the Teaching Tolerance Program emphasizes social justice and anti-bias. It's a project of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and we're proposing to bring this systemic training to our school district. The anti-bias training approach encourages children and young people to challenge prejudice and learn how to be agents of change in their own lives. The Teaching Tolerance social justice standards show how anti-bias education works through 4 domains, and those domains are identity, diversity, justice, and action. The first training that we are proposing that the board approved this evening is for 30 elementary school teachers to work as part of the social studies vertical team. These teachers will serve as ambassadors to the other elementary team members as we work through our K-5 curriculum. Particularly, the training is called Unpacking the Teaching Tolerance Social Justice Standards, and this is the first wave of that training. And this is going to take place even before the school year starts on August 21st. It will be online training, it will be synchronous training, and the objective is for the participants of the training to deepen their understanding of the social justice standards as a way to create and sustain classroom and school environments that honor diversity, equity, and justice. The participants will leave with an understanding of how to authentically incorporate the social justice standards into their daily practice. This is a particular training that our staff has been asking for, so we're happy to be able to bring this in even before we come back to school this summer. The second training is called Let's Talk. It's also going to be a virtual training, and it's going to be for 30 administrators, counselors, and/or teachers. This is really focusing on that administrative level so that we can use this to underpin the other trainings that we'll be doing in our buildings and throughout the district. This is the objective of this particular training is to develop skills and confidence in engaging in and facilitating critical conversations about race and other topics. It's called Let's Talk, and it's an interactive virtual PD, and the participants will learn strategies for creating supportive learning environments that encourage risk-taking. Through engaging in conversations about critical topics about race, participants will reflect on their own assumptions and biases that can affect their ability to engage in productive conversations. This one really is meant to have the administrative counselor training so that it can impact all of the other trainings that we do in our buildings. The third training set to take place on November 12th is also a virtual training, and it's called Addressing Inequities at School. We're still working through our diversity committees, and this one really is to target the committees in the district, and the goal of the training is to examine the inequities at a macro level for stumbling over my own words, for systemic change across the district. The 2 on-site trainings that we are looking at, one, the requested date of February 12th, and we are hopeful that we will be able to do this training on site, is for 80 teachers to be trained that day, primarily high school and middle school social study teachers, and then we will round that out by other K-12 teachers. In this particular training, participants will explore practical strategies for accomplishing academic and social emotional goals side by side. They'll discuss learning conditions that honor all identities and reflect diversity, equity, and justice. And then our final training, the requested date of May 11th, is called Facilitating Critical Conversations. And this interactive workshop on site, hopefully, will involve 80 members of our staff from administration, counselors, teachers, and perhaps members of the diversity teams. So we're looking at a full approach of what we'd like to do with the teaching tolerance folks as one part of the training that we're offering. We are still talking to the NAACP and we are talking to the Anti-Defamation League, but we're not able to bring those proposals through for board approval at this particular meeting, but anticipate that more will follow. What is making it a little bit difficult is no one knows when they can actually have full staff training on purpose or in person, and it's a little hard to do a full staff training via Zoom. So that's just been a little bit of a wrinkle, but we know we can anchor these trainings right now. The other piece I wanted to talk about this evening was what we're doing as we look ahead for our return to school for the 2021 school year. I know I mentioned in one of my prior reports, and Dr. Citarelli-Jones mentioned that we have an awful lot of work that is taking place this summer. Very particularly, Dr. Citarelli-Jones talked about the work that the Education Committee is doing. But we have two other significant committees that are working right now as well. Ferg Abbott is heading up our Planning Committee, and Gina Ross is heading up our Infection Prevention Committee. All three committees are looking at what can the fall look like for us? Can we come back with all of our children in session? Must we come back with an altered schedule where some of our children can come on site at a given time and some would learn virtually, and then perhaps the others that were learning virtually would come on site perhaps the next day? We are looking at all of those options to see what is feasible. But while we are doing that, we're looking at all of the guidance that we're getting. And I'd like to highlight some of that because there's an awful lot coming in. It's almost too much to read. But we are getting guidance from the CDC, from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Chester County Department of Health, Bucks County Department of Health. And while we are looking at all of those documents, they're not in agreement with each other. So just today, I joined a number of superintendents, the Department of Healths of Bucks County and Chester County, one of the doctors from the University of Pennsylvania who specializes in this area. And we were talking about what do we do when the reports do not align? There are some reports that say we should have 6-foot social distancing. And at 6-foot social distancing, we know we cannot bring everybody back into our buildings. Some of the reports say 3-foot social distancing would be okay. We may be able to get all of our children in school, but we don't know if that would be the recommended practice to bring everybody in. So one of the things we are trying to do is get agreement from all of the entities. We'll be jumping back on a call with individuals on Monday, and I know that's what we're going to focus on again. We are really looking for that recommendation. Is 3-foot social distancing sufficient? Or do we really need to look at a cohort model where we bring some of our children back at one time and some back at a different time, focusing on all children coming back on site? We just have to get that part right. And to that end, I wanted to tell everybody that we are planning to schedule a special board meeting on July 6th at 7 p.m. in the evening, at which time we are anticipating sharing where we are with our return to school for 2021, knowing that everything seems to be subject to change when the next report comes in or the latest update comes in. But we'd like to give you our latest thinking on July 6th. And we'd also like to bring forward for board approval our master health and safety plan for the district, as well as our athletics health and safety plan. So definitely you will be getting more information from me in the meantime. We're also anticipating sending a survey out to parents to get initial perceptions on what are your thoughts about sending your children to school in the fall, whether you'll be taking advantage of bus service. What are your thoughts? And we'd like to have that information prior to the July 6th meeting. So anticipate more correspondence from me and the board meeting on the 6th. And Dr. Grandy, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. So that takes us to Board announcements. The board met on June 15th in executive session to discuss negotiations, and prior to this meeting to discuss school safety and security. I'll also mention, as Dr. Palmer just alluded to, the plans for a special board meeting on July 6th at 7 p.m. We also intend to have a brief special board meeting on June 25th this week at 7 a.m. to approve the Wallingford-Swarthmore Education Association contract for the upcoming school year. So we would like to proceed with contract approval. I also want to take this time during board announcements to share the results of the surveys that were sent out to district parents and staff related to making COVID-related changes to the school calendar. We will vote on a change later in this meeting, but I wanted to share the results now with the full board. As you may recall, this discussion was prompted by our CHOP experts that were guests 2 board meetings ago that presented recommendations about school reopening. And as part of those recommendations, they encouraged us to look at options to start school earlier. The primary reasoning being that COVID rates are projected to be lower in the summer and potentially higher in the fall and winter. And of course, we will also see other seasonal viruses, including influenza in the winter, which will potentially create disruptions given the overlap in symptoms with COVID. So the goal has been to look at options for moving up the start date for the next academic year, and to also consider a longer break during peak flu and cold season to maximize the bricks and mortar educational time. So I am going to pull up some slides and then hopefully not trip over myself trying to share my screen, but let me do that in a moment. Okay. I will ask, I see Damon on my screen. Damon, can you nod and tell me if you see my slides? Okay, thank you. All right, we've had enough technical difficulties tonight. I didn't need another one. So again, I wanna really thank our parents and all the district staff that took the time to complete our survey that we sent out on changes to the school calendar. This went out to all families in the district as well as staff. We had over 1,500 responses from families in the district and over 300 responses from staff. And in general, many of you, of course, have seen the survey, but for families, we asked about whether or not, in general, people were favor or opposed to various start options, looking at everything from 1 week early to 4 weeks early compared to what the current calendar says. And then also extended winter break options as well, in addition to potential considerations that families may have around why they favor or oppose certain options. And then we were interested in hearing from our teachers, of course, about what their views of these various options were and what types of hardship could be brought about by moving up the start date of the school year of when we bring kids in the buildings. So I will jump right to the results. So what you see here is all the data for 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week in terms of moving up the start date. And then the last bar over there all the way on the right is an extended winter break. Then in the colors you see dark green is strongly favor, light green is favor, gray is neutral, yellow is oppose, and red is strongly oppose. So when we look at starting 4 weeks early, it was about 40% of families were in support of that option and looked at it favorably. A little more than 10% were neutral, but almost half the people were opposed to that option. When we looked at moving things up 3 weeks, we get to about half of our district families saying they're in favor of that option. About 15% were neutral, but still a fair amount of opposition to moving up that far. So, just over, 23, 24% were strongly opposed. And then when you get to 2 weeks, you start to see support increase. So now 60% of people find this option to be favorable. Again, somewhere between 15 and 20% are neutral, and about 15% are strongly opposed to that option. And it looks somewhat similar in terms of the favorability for 1 week as well, but what you see is the percentage of people who strongly oppose it, just over 10%, starting to diminish there. When you move all the way to the right and look at the idea of extending winter break, so taking advantage of starting early and using those days to extend winter break, overall, people are pretty supportive of that. So about 2/3 of respondents, viewed that option favorably. There's another 20-some% who are neutral, and just about 10% of people were either opposed or strongly opposed. So that gives you a sense of where the parents are in terms of this discussion. Looking at our responses from staff, again, this was framed around the extent that this might cause hardship. And so certainly we see in red there, major hardship. 75% of staff reported starting 4 weeks early would be a major hardship. At 3 weeks, that drops down to about 55%. You get down to about 1/3 at 2 weeks, and then close to 10% at 1 week. And then again, the data for extended winter recess looks somewhat similar, but even more favorable, I would say, in terms of staff views. So again, it's a little over 10% felt like it would be a major hardship, but more than 60% of people felt like it was an insignificant level of hardship to make that change. So in summary, I would say support for starting 4 weeks early was tepid. Again, I think everyone on this board knows I've been an advocate of trying to move up our start date, but I recognize that support for moving up that much, both on the from the perspective of families as well as teachers, is not terribly high. But support does really rise substantially, particularly for moving things up 2 weeks to August 24th and also 1 week to August 31st. There was strong support for an extended winter break, and 1/3 of the staff report that starting 2 weeks early, though, would be a major hardship. But when we look at moving up things by 1 week, that really drops off substantially. So what you see on the agenda tonight is a proposed calendar that reflects the following. The first would be to have students re-enter our buildings 1 week early on August 31st. We would move some professional development days around that were currently scheduled for August before school starts to other times so that the staff start date is not substantially impacted by making this change. So we'd get the kids in the building a week earlier than planned, and our teachers would more or less be in the buildings at the time that they had originally planned for. And then by starting 1 week early, it would allow us to do a couple of things. One is we could take what is currently an interrupted week of Thanksgiving and turn that into a full week of recess. And then our winter recess could go from 1.5 weeks to 2 full weeks. And I think what this allows us to do is have 2 different periods in the fall where we have more prolonged periods with students out of the buildings during periods of higher viral illness. And I think from a public health standpoint, there could be a lot of compelling reasons to do that, to try to break some chains of transmission. And again, I would just say, that a lot of, as we think about health protocols in the fall, we will have to be really vigilant about respiratory symptoms that develop in household members and students. And, beyond COVID, there will be a lot more kids during that time of year who will have various respiratory illnesses with a lot of overlapping features with COVID. And so I think that having these slightly lengthened periods with kids out of the building during those times could potentially be beneficial for us. So anyway, that's the survey data. We will certainly come back to this item further on in the agenda to vote on. But I would, take this time now to invite any board members, if you had any specific comments or questions about the survey, I will try to answer them. Hang on 1 second. I'm trying to stop my screen share so I can see everyone. And Jen.
Thank you, Dave. Is it possible to know how this moving up would impact the sports that typically take place in August, or is it too soon?
Dr. Palmer, do you have thoughts you could share on that?
Jen, it's a little bit too soon because we're still doing our athletic plan to acclimate our athletes to be able to come back. And we're not sure when we'll be able to actually have contact sports starting. But I know our students will still go through whatever heat acclimation processes, days, and training that they're going to have. This should not substantially alter that, but we don't have definitive plans yet.
Okay. And we think that that will still occur, those sports for them, but we're not sure.
We're not sure. We are
Okay.
really hopeful, but we are
Okay.
not sure.
Thank you.
Marilyn.
So the longer breaks for both Thanksgiving and the winter holidays, from the school district's perspective, do create an opportunity for infections to dissipate. As long as families aren't traveling to locations that have more infections present and then bringing them back to us. And so that's something that families should be aware of, and not use this change in the calendar as a reason to make travel plans without knowing what the infection situation is going to be at those times.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I certainly would expect that during this year, travel will be far more limited for families for sure around the holidays. Obviously, we don't know that for sure, but based on recent travel habits, it seems like maybe things will be far more scaled back than what we would typically see during a more normal year. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Again, we'll come back to this. Okay, well, thank you. So now we move on to our focus topics this evening. And so I will ask Dr. Palmer to introduce our topics and speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. I had a moment of panic as we were getting ready to introduce this one. It is that time of year when we would highlight our retirees, and Mr. Abbott texted me that he lost his internet, but I'm happy to report that he has it again. So it is possible that he may have an issue in between. So if it goes out, just know that he did have an issue. But what we'd like to do now is honor our retirees. So Mr. Abbott will join us virtually to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Assume everybody can see it?
We can.
Thank you. So each year we take time to honor our retirees. And this year we have 20 retirees to honor. That is 512 years of service. On average, that is 26 years for each of the 20 retirees we are honoring this evening. Each of these individuals has brought a wealth of knowledge, stability, and leadership to our community. Their daily interactions with our students, whether it be on the playground, in the office, in the classroom, or in passing, have greatly influenced our students year after year. Their reliability and dependability have helped shape our students and community for that combined total of 512 years. Normally, we'd be able to honor many of our retirees in person. However, like so many other routines, we aren't able to go on in the same manner, but it still doesn't mean we can't take just a moment to honor their service to the district. So this year, we jump right to the class of the 15 to 20-year-old group. That's 15 to 20 years of service, that is. Anna Fong, who came to us in 2002, she started with us in our FLES program. FLES standing for Foreign Language in the Elementary Schools. She then proceeded to become a world languages teacher at the high school. Ralph Harris, who's been with us for 18 years since 2003, he joined us in the maintenance staff. Candace, or Candy Peary, has been with us for 20 years and came to us in 2001. She has been a health and physical education teacher and a family and consumer sciences teacher at the high school, at the middle school, at SRS, and the kids' place. Mary Costello came to us in 2000. She has been a reading specialist both at the middle school and at SRS. Irma Kubiak came to us in 2000. She started off as a kindergarten teacher at the kids' place, that's TKP, and that before going to Wallingford Elementary as a grade level teacher. Leslie Taylor, who's been with us for 20 years, has been an art teacher that entire time at the high school. And then Kathleen Gemberling. She started off as a family and consumer sciences teacher at the middle school. She was a split family and consumer sciences teacher, and then back then as a guidance counselor at the high school. She went on to become strictly a guidance counselor at the high school and then ended up as a counselor at SRS. It's quite a group. We still have quite a group at the 21 to 25 year section. Teresa McGeehan, who's been instructional support for all 20 years at Wallingford Elementary. John Lynch, retiring after 21 years, came to us in 1999. He's a social studies teacher at the high school for the entire time. And I got to add a side note that John is retiring as the president of the Wallingford-Swarthmore Education Association. And although we look forward to the new leadership, John has been a great leader and we'll miss it. Jim Hardy, who actually retired a while ago, but still within the year, was with us for 22 years, first in the maintenance staff, and then as our operations supervisor. Mary Charlotte, otherwise known as MC, has been a special ed teacher at SRS for all of her 23 years. Martha Lambertson came to us in 1997. She's been a media specialist at West that entire time. And then Donna Rainier, who came to us in 1995, started out as instructional support at Nether Providence Elementary before becoming a grade level teacher and spending her entire career at Nether Providence Elementary. Moving on to our 26 to 30 years of service group. It's getting small now. Marcy Adams, instructional support since 1993 at SRS. 27 years in instructional support staff member. And then Michelle Rufo came to us in 1990 as a kindergartner teacher and then became a grade level teacher at Wallingford Elementary. And just when you thought the group was getting smaller, it stays the same with the 31 to 35 year group. Steve O'Keefe, he's been our communications specialist at the high school for all 33 years. Anita DiDomenico came to us in 1986. Was a special ed teacher at NPE to start. She is a reading teacher at SRS, and she was before becoming a grade level teacher at Nether Providence Elementary. And there we go, the 36 to 40 year group. We have Teddy Pasitos, who ended her career as a math teacher at the high school. She came to us in 1983 and started as a tutor. She at one point taught language arts, math, reading, and science at the middle school before becoming strictly math at the middle school and then the high school. and as a side note, was very involved in our theater program. Kathy Laird, with 38 years, she also started out as a tutor at Wallingford Elementary before becoming a grade level teacher where she spent her entire career at Wes. And then finally, Mark Taylor, with 40 years of experience, came to us in 1980. And this could be the last of our individuals that worked at Swarthmore High School. He started there as a social studies teacher. Before becoming a social studies teacher at the high school, he then went back to then SRS, the K-8 building, where he was a dean and a guidance counselor. So a dean, a student, and a guidance counselor. I think that's an oxymoron. Before becoming a guidance counselor, rotating between the middle school and the high school with numerous positions as a coach. And there does it. That's 20 retirees this year. It's quite a large group. We wish them well. We honor them. If it had been done in person, they would be receiving their plaque. But if you're listening tonight, that plaque's in the mail, as they say. It'll be coming soon. Thank you, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. And on behalf of all of us, thank you to all of our retirees for their exceptional commitment to our children and our families. We are truly honored to have them as a special part of our WSSD family. Thank you.
And I would just add, again, deep appreciation for all those individuals that Ferg just recognized. I think it's always a very special time of year when we sit in person at our board meetings to see Ferg make some of our longest standing faculty and staff blush in person as he gives them their plaques. But we will miss all of you. And again, we're deeply thankful for all that you've done for the district. Dr. Palmer, you want to introduce our next topic?
I do. And as I am ready to introduce this one, I thought I'm going to just define what a budget is. So a budget is an estimate of of expected income and expense for a given period in the future. And what that given period is really subject to interpretation 1 minute after the next. Martha Q, our business administrator, is going to be presenting our final budget this evening, what we are recommending that the board will approve. And when I say given period in the future, I have never talked so much about the budget because every time Martha and I speak, there are new conditions that are emerging, a different road we can go down, a different thought that we might have for next year. And all while she has to calculate every assumption that we're making. So this truly has been a budget that has just been unprecedented. Often when she is presenting, we are struck with how uncertain our revenues are. This year, it's quite the opposite. What we're most uncertain about is what our expenditures will be. So it really is quite the challenge to do the budget this year. And on behalf of the board, on behalf of the administration, Martha, thank you to you and your team for being able to do every iteration that we needed to get us to this point to be able to present the final budget to the board. So you can take it away when you're ready.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Hopefully you can see my screen. As I said back in May, this is a financial time unlike any other. There are still so many unknowns. At this point, my crystal ball and I aren't on speaking terms anymore. No one has experienced anything like the current situation, and I doubt we will fully understand the ramifications of COVID-19 effects until we're far into the 2021 school year and possibly beyond. Literally, the school education landscape is changing daily, as Dr. Palmer mentioned in her earlier remarks. There are so many unknowns and the answers are still elusive. It is in this environment that the final budget for 2021 is being presented. The school administration has tried to anticipate as many issues as possible, but there are only so many paths that can be followed before each one becomes fraught with uncertainty, which causes an inability to provide any semblance of reliability. We have examined, researched, trended, contrasted, compared the district revenues in an effort to provide the best forecast for the 2021 revenue picture that is possible given the current circumstances. Local revenues make up just short of 77% of the revenue budget. Included in local revenues are property taxes, per capita taxes, transfer taxes, interest earnings, facility rentals, and miscellaneous revenues. State revenues make up just over 19% of the revenue stream and include the basic ed subsidy, special education subsidy, transportation subsidy, what is called the rental sinking fund, which is better known as Plan Con or the debt service reimbursement, Social Security and PSERS reimbursement, and the property tax reduction allocation. The state approved a 5-month budget in May for 2021. However, they fully funded education at the 1920 rates for all 12 months. Federal reserves are less than 0.5% and are made up of the Title I, Title II, and Title IV programs. Please remember that back in January, I asked the taxpayers to reach out to our legislators to help reduce the reliance on taxpayers to fund school districts. At that time, I noted that Pennsylvania is 44th out of 50 states in funding public education and 7th on relying on local dollars to fund public education. As you can see, this pattern continues. As I noted a moment ago, the state has approved public education funding for the coming year, but at the 1920 funding rate. The 2021 budget will rely heavily on the fund balance to balance this budget by depending upon over $30 million to come from that source to close the structural deficit. I hope I said $3 million. It is remarkable that in January, I presented a budget with a structural deficit of only $916,000. When these few short months later, this budget is now depending upon almost 3.5% of its revenue stream to come from the general fund balance. As far as expenditures have undergone scrutiny both in looking at potential cost savings or what would call cost avoidance and trying to anticipate for additional cost items never anticipated for a school district budget. Approximately 42% of the total expenditure budget is for salaries, and benefits make up another 28% for approximately 70% of the total budget. Purchase services, which includes professional services, things like therapists, consultants, legal counsel, contractors, tuition to specialized schools, the intermediate unit, program costs, payments to community college, repairs, leases, such as copiers, and insurance represents just over 17% of the budget. Principal, interest, and fees make up just under 10% of the budget. Fees includes items like membership fees, licenses, certifications. Supplies are textbooks, small equipment, utilities, instructional and non-instructional supplies, and software. This is just over 3% of our budget. The budgetary reserve, which is money set aside for unanticipated expenditures that occurred during the school year, represents less than 0.5% of the total budget. As to the unanticipated nature of items, just look at how 1920 school year ended. Districts had to pivot to an online educational model from a fully in-house model in 2 short weeks. Technology, both in the form of Chromebooks and hotspots, needed to be supplied to the students, and educational platforms, including Seesaw, Zoom, Google Classroom, had to be acquired. PPE, or personal protective equipment, has become a district requirement, when before March, most people could not have told you what PPE meant. The Act 1 index for 2021 is 2.6%. 2.6% represents basically $1.6 million at a 97% tax collection rate. The district is eligible for one exception, and it is for expenditures previously incurred and borne by the district based on a comparison of special education expenditures from 2017-2018 to the 2018-19 year. This exception will provide approximately $529,000, again at a 97% collection rate. Please remember, even with this tax increase, we are still depending upon the district's general fund balance for over $3 million to balance this budget. As I said in the beginning of this presentation, this budget is made during unprecedented times. There are no guidelines that outline how to develop a budget under the current environment. There are so many unknowns as to how to plan for this budget, and so many areas where we cannot begin to understand the effect this environment will have on district revenues or expenditure needs as we proceed into 2021. I do want to bring up two other things that we are doing. Each year, the state authorizes property tax reduction allocations that are passed on to eligible homeowners through what is called the homestead farmstead eligibility. The eligible homeowner will see a reduction in assessed value on their tax bill. This year, the state authorized an amount similar to the 1920 year balance. This amount is then divided over the eligible homeowners in the district. So when you look at ours, we have 5,015 eligible homeowners. This will result in an assessed value reduction of $7,579 or approximately $366 in tax reduction. Another thing that we're considering and is on the board for approval, a board agenda for approval, for the 2021 school year, the board is taking into consideration the unprecedented action of adjusting both the tax payment periods and the installment periods. Currently, the real estate taxes are due by August 31 to obtain the discount of 2%. And the standard or face amounts are due by October 31 to avoid the 10% penalty. For 2021, this would be changed to a September 15th due date to take advantage of the discount and a November 30th due date to avoid the penalty. For taxpayers that pay by installments, the first payment is currently due by August 31st, the second by October 15th, and the final by November 30th. For 2021, these would be changed to September 10th for the first period, November 20th for the second, and January 29th for that final payment. 1920 was a year of great upheaval, and school districts had to move their educational response to a totally different learning model in 2 weeks' time. 2021 at this point is a year of unknowns. We are entering into a summer, and we are working on student and staff safety, reopening models, creative classroom structures, transportation scenarios, food service functions, and so much more. We are presenting a budget with a $3 million structural deficit, and we were presenting it in a time of great unknowns. However, we do have something that is known and will be utilized to the district's benefit. The state and federal government has allocated grant money in an effort to offset some costs for the coming year. We'll be using this money to pay for help pay for some of the one-to-one computers as well as some of the PPE needs. So thank you to the state and federal government for that support. However, we cannot forget where we started with our preliminary budget. When I presented the preliminary budget, I asked that taxpayers reach out to the legislators to ask them to do their part in funding school districts. I make this request again. As you saw with the earlier slide, our taxpayers are doing their part to support this district as our local revenues make up 77% of the district revenue stream. It's time for the state and federal government to do their part. The state is only responsible for less than 20% of the district revenue, and the federal government is responsible for basically 1/3 of 1% of the district revenue. The representatives and senators listen to their constituents, and the more contacts they receive on an issue, the more they recognize that this issue is important and must be addressed. We are all doing our part. Now it's time for them to do their part. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Q. I see some hands going up. I will just make a quick comment, which is, I think the point that you raised during these times, like help is needed. And, I know that there have been discussions in Washington about whether or not more federal help could be sent down to states and school districts and directly to school districts. And the state of Pennsylvania is also facing a gigantic, budget hole right now. And really the federal government that can be and should be in a position to step up to help school districts, because the issues that we're facing are being faced by school districts all around Pennsylvania and all around the country. The first hand I saw go up was Kelly.
Ms. Q, thank you for the presentation. I know that the impact to our taxpayers of a budget like this is difficult at best. Many folks are feeling the impact directly through loss of employment or other challenges that they're facing as well. And I wondered, I know that I have heard, I should say, comments that you see in different places where folks think that our expenses or school district expenses must have gone down substantially during a period in which we were not in face-to-face instruction. I know we've had conversations about what kind of things actually have to continue despite being closed. We've talked about things like gas and the fact that gas purchases are locked in well before this period, for example, or also things like investment income and the impact that the downturn in the economy has had on investment income. Could you comment a little bit on the what I would call a misperception that exists in some parts of the community about how much expenses for school districts went down during a period of not in face-to-face instruction, or even if they went down at all, if we're able to even tell that yet?
Sure, I have no problem with making comments. First off, when this happened and the legislation went through, districts were required to fully pay all of our staff through the end of June or the end of the school year, depending upon what their function was. And so salaries and benefits wise, there is no change. And again, that's 70% of my budget. You mentioned gasoline. We literally lock in our gasoline purchases basically a year before the year happens. So even though our buses aren't on the road, we had to buy that gas because we were committed to buy those gallons. And what we did do to try to offset some of this is we literally went out on the market and sold the difference in the gas that we don't have tanks to store that many gallons on our property, nor would we want to. The problem is gas prices were extremely down at that point. So we really didn't save anything in gas by having to sell the gas off. We certainly saved some money in substitute teachers. You know, when you're in school in the bricks and mortar time, if a teacher is out, you would have a substitute teacher. Yes, we continued with the substitute teachers that were in for long-term periods, but we really didn't have those daily subs that you would have normally when you were in a face-to-face circumstance. My projections at this point for the end of the 19-20 year, remember that budget started with an $800,000 structural deficit to start with. Right now, my projections are basically a $700,000 structural deficit. So there really isn't a significant difference between the two budgets. Let me know if you have any other questions on that. The other hand I see up is Jen Lentz.
Yeah, Jen, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Ms. Q. When you give the approximate $3 million deficit in your presentation, does that already include and account for the state money, or would that offset that figure?
Are you talking about the grant money?
Yes.
Neither the expense nor the grant is in that budget because it's a direct one-to-one dollar match. So if we were given $100, I have to spend $100. So that $3 million deficit isn't affected by the grant at all because quite honestly, it is a direct one-to-one match.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board questions? Ms. Q, are you hearing any optimism about any federal relief, or is there no further news on that front?
I have not heard any optimism from the federal government at all.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much, Ms. Q, for the presentation. So that takes us to audience recognition for response to items for action on the agenda this evening. As I stated earlier, members of the public wishing to address the board have been and continue to be encouraged to call 610-892-3470 extension 1102 to leave their recorded comments for the board, subject to a 3-minute time limit. Any comments left prior to 5 o'clock today have been transcribed and made available to the board. And we will acknowledge comments left that are related to items on the agenda at this time. Any comments left after 5 o'clock but prior to end of the meeting will still be transcribed, distributed to the board, and made a part of the record, but will not be acknowledged during the meeting this evening. I'm going to ask Kelly, I think we do have one public comment for an item on the agenda this evening.
That is correct. And this is pertaining to the the calendar for the year. And this is a comment from Ben Hall on Church Road in Wallingford. And Mr. Hall stated the following: "My name is Ben Hall. I live on Church Road in Wallingford. This message is to share a public comment for the June 22nd board meeting on the topic of scheduling and calendaring and the possibility of starting classes early for the 2021 calendar year and potentially extending winter break as well. So here's the viewpoint on this from a 2-worker household of a soon-to-be 1st and 5th graders. My view is that we should absolutely start at least 1 week early at a minimum. 2 weeks early is good also, more on that in a moment. 3 weeks early, I suppose, to be okay. I think if you start creeping 4 weeks early and starting school before August 15th, I feel pretty strongly that's probably a bridge too far. Now, with that said, while all of this is being discussed, I'd also like to pile on an opportunity to say our district, simply stated, starts the school year too late, period. Even under normal circumstances, or said differently, even if there was no such thing as coronavirus, we should still be starting school at least a week earlier, maybe even 2 weeks earlier. I know this has been a topic of some discussion, and I know it's been met with some resistance, both because of historical inertia. And let's face it, we live in a reasonably affluent area of Delaware County, relatively speaking. And so we have, I'm sure, plenty of folks with shore homes where they want to retreat right up to Labor Day, where they might have stay-at-home parents to watch kids. But for those of us who don't have shore houses and have 2 workers outside the home, we end up in a real pickle every year for those last 2 weeks in August for childcare, because camps closed off mid-August when the counselors, who are their high schoolers, who are going back to sports, music, college kids who start on earlier academic schedule calendars. Either way, the camps close, we're inevitably left with 2 weeks where we have a real problem for childcare and figuring out arrangements. This starting a week or 2 early is something we should be doing, even irrespective of coronavirus, and this year perhaps isn't a good excuse to take it for a test drive. Similar theme on the ideas of problems with childcare and extending winter break to be longer. This creates a real childcare problem for a 2-worker household like ours, so I would strongly oppose that as well. And then finally, my last comment is that whatever the game plan is going to be, obviously there's merit making the decision not in undue haste, but certainly not dragging it out either, because there's going to be folks who need to make adjustments to any of their would-be summer plans that they may have already had on the books. Thank you for your consideration. And that ends the comments for items on the calendar, or sorry, on the agenda this evening.
Thank you, Kelly. And so I do anticipate and do hope that we come to some final decision this evening related to the calendar. So that takes us to the minutes. Our first item for action is the modification of the minutes of the meeting of May 26, 2020 that were approved on June 8th, 2020, and specifically item 10.I to reflect the election of Mr. Lawrence Cutis as board treasurer rather than his appointment to that position, and also minutes from the June 6th regular business meeting, and I so move. Do we have a second?
Second, Mrs. Walkman, Kelly Walkman.
Thank you, Kelly. Any discussion? All right. Michelle, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Vallis,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye. And then, Michelle, I'm realizing you have to call on yourself.
Do I have to call on myself? Okay.
Yes, you should vote.
I mean, I did vote. I just didn't vote out loud.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Gowdy.
You
Aye.
simply need to indicate what your vote is.
Okay.
So
Aye.
you vote aye. Okay. So the vote carries 9-0. Thank you. So that takes us to personnel. We have 19 items for action in personnel. Are there any on the list that anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. Bear with me. It's a long list. We have the approval of 3 resignations. Brian Picknally at the middle school, Darlene Klingerman, the administrative assistant to the superintendent, and Elizabeth McCampbell, instructional support at the high school. We have the approval of 2 appointments with dates as described in the agenda. Christopher Conlon, emotional support special education teacher at West. Megan Lesky, a life skills special ed teacher at the high school. We have the approval of the resignation of the board secretary effective June 21st. We have the approval of 2 changes of assignment as described in the agenda. We have the election of Mary Figura effective June 22nd to complete the current term of board secretary ending June 30th, 2021 with a stipend attached to that position. This election is pursuant to section 404 of the Pennsylvania School Code. We have the approval of the employment contract for the Director of Human Resources effective July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2022. We have the approval of Amendment 1 to the 2017 through 2021 Act 93 compensation plan. We have the approval of Amendment 1 to the 2017 through 2021 exempt supervisory employment compensation plan. We have the approval of all Nether Providence Elementary School, Swarthmore Rutledge School, and Wallingford Elementary School certificated teaching professionals, non-teaching professionals, and instructional support staff to work on the positive behavior interventions and support strategies and curriculum at the rate of $37 per hour for teaching and non-teaching professionals, and their hourly rate for instructional support staff not to exceed 225 hours total for all schools for the 2020-2021 school year. We have the approval of all school psychologists for additional work days at their per diem rate not to exceed 100 days total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of all school counselors for additional work days at their per diem rate not to exceed 5 days each, with 10 days for the K-12 counselor department chairperson during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of all special education teaching professionals for development of individual education plans at the rate of $37 per hour, not to exceed 90 hours total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of all special education teaching professionals to work on curriculum development at the rate of $37 per hour, not to exceed 80 hours total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of Rebecca Schwam to work on curriculum development at the rate of $37 per hour, not to exceed 80 hours total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of the social worker and home and school visitor for additional work days at their per diem rate, not to exceed 12 days each during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of all speech and language therapists for additional work days at their per diem rate, not to exceed 25 days total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of all school nurses for additional work days at their per diem or per hour rate not to exceed 50 days total during the 2020 summer. We have the approval of payment to additional staff for flex time earned during the 2019-2020 school year at the rate of $37 per hour as stipulated. We have the approval of the 2020-2021 appointment and stipend for Christopher Matsenka as district testing coordinator as stipulated. All of these items in the section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Jerry Ballas.
Thank you, Jerry.
Second, Marilyn Huff.
Thank you, Marilyn. Any discussion?
I had one question.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
The The curriculum development work, Dr. Palmer, I'm not remembering whether that is directly related to some of the work that we've been talking about with respect to our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Can you comment on that?
Ms. Swarthmore, are you referring to a particular agenda item this evening, or just in general, are there any?
I'm specifically looking at item M as in Marie for the curriculum development summer work, and whether that's related or unrelated to looking at the curriculum from the diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective.
I believe this was work that was already underway. I believe what we will do is bring additional hours forward for the other work that we want done. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe this pertains to it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay. Michelle, can you please take a roll call vote?
I vote aye. Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye. All right, the item is passed 9-0. All right. Dr. Palmer, did you have another comment you wanted to make?
I do. Thank you, Dr. Grandy. Mrs. Walkman, I now can answer you definitively. Motion M was for our special educators, and they are working on very particular curriculum development. So no, we will be bringing additional items forward to you, not regarding this, our initiative for the diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that takes us to policy. We have 2 sets of items. Would anyone like any separated from the rest? Okay. First, we have the approval of the 3rd reading of the 4 policies approved in previously in their 1st and 2nd readings, 003, 006, 006.1, and 008. The policy changes are all indicated in the attachments, and they will become final after today, which again represents the 3rd and final reading and vote. We also have the approval of the adoption of the intermediate units, policies, and procedures under the federal requirements of 34 CFR 300.151 through 300.608 for the 2020-2021 school year. And these items again are as attached. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Marilyn Huff.
Thank you, Marilyn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Larry. Any discussion? Okay, Michelle, can we get another roll call vote, please?
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
aye for me, and Dr. Grandy.
Aye. Okay, the items pass 9-0. We move on to curriculum. We have 5 items for action in curriculum. Are there any items on the list anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. First, we have the approval of the 2020-2021 school year related services provider contracts as provided. We have the approval of the 2020 ESY and 2020-2021 school year tuition contracts as stipulated. We have the approval of the Southern Poverty Law Center MOU not to exceed $1,500 for a professional development program during August and November through their Teaching Tolerance project. We have the approval of the Southern Poverty Law Center MOU not to exceed $5,000 for further professional development during February and May. And finally, we have the approval of the revised 2020-2021 school year calendar as described in the attachment. And again, to summarize those changes, the teacher start date on this revised calendar is August 24th. the first day for students in the buildings is Monday, August 31st. This includes an extended November break for students for a full week around the Thanksgiving holiday, and includes around the December break for students and staff, the 2 full weeks of winter recess. Again, all of these things are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Was that Marilyn?
Oh, sorry, Chapin.
Oh, Chapin. Thank you, Chapin. Do we have a second?
Second, Jerry Ballas.
Thank you, Jerry. Any discussion?
I would.
Go for it.
Aye. Damon Rossetti. Yeah, moving it forward a week is good. I would have preferred 2 weeks earlier, and I'm a little disappointed we couldn't get that done. But I think 1 week forward is definitely an improvement.
Now I can see hands. Okay, Chapin.
Yeah, my question is, it looked to me from the stats that parents were evenly divided. I mean, not evenly divided, we're dead even on 1 week or 2. So there was no more preference from parents or less about 1 or 2 weeks, which sort of leans in favor of 2. But the teachers and staff were much more, I should say much less in favor. There was a definite difference there, more hardship. And I'm wondering if anybody would care to summarize some of the comments that we read in the qualitative sections where we asked for comments on the teachers and staff about why, to give the public a sense of why so many more of them would have preferred 1 week than 2, which I assume is part of what the decision-making process was, since parents were even, but the teachers were more hesitant to come back with 2.
Yeah, it's hard. I read through all of them, and as did Dr. Palmer, and I know some board members as well. It's hard to fully capture everything in several hundred comments, but I guess I would say, there was some themes in there related to, wanting to maximize prep time, for the upcoming year. I guess both at an individual level, but also wanting to make sure that the district had adequate time to get ready for the school year. So I would say that was one category. There was definitely, some concerns raised by teachers who, had made other arrangements for the summer already based on the existing calendar, and didn't want to see a major change made. And I think in many cases, I think the fact that, there was much less hardship reported at 1 week probably reflects some of that planning. Those were a couple of the big areas. There were certainly lots of very particular, concerns raised that weren't necessarily widely represented, but I think those were 2 that caught my attention. Dr. Palmer, did you have any additional comments on it?
Dr. Grandy, I think they are the largest 2 that we had. Many of the other ones were a few people thought this or that, but they are the largest.
Chapin, does that help?
Yeah, I mean, that squares with mine. I read through them all too. I just thought it would be helpful to let the public in, since
Sure.
Those weren't captured, all those qualitative responses and the reasons, and understanding why, if it was even for the parents, why did we go with 1 instead of 2?
Yeah. No, and I, as Damon said earlier, I think all of you know where my heart is on this issue, which I would like to, try to move things up as much as possible. But I think just trying to balance, the views and concerns of as many people as possible. I would have hoped maybe to get to 2 weeks, but I think again, just trying to balance all the views and interests of everyone involved and implicated in this decision. I'm okay with changing things for 1 week. I recognize that in any other year, it would be highly unusual to revisit the school calendar in June. But these are highly unusual times as well. Any other discussion? Okay, Michelle, can you take a roll call vote, please? Michelle?
Yep. Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
aye,
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
aye from me, Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye. Okay, the items pass 9-0. We move on to finance, where we have 16 items for approval. Are there any items on the list anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. First, we have the approval of payment of invoices to vendors dated May 16th through June 12th, 2020 as attached. We have the approval of a consulting agreement with Candoras Technologies LLC for 25 hours of network support for 2020-2021 school year. We have the approval of a consulting agreement with Candoras Technologies LLC for 16 hours of on-site network support for the 2020-2021 school year. We have the approval of the 2020-2021 Lightspeed renewal with Integra One at a cost not to exceed $18,759. We have the approval of the 2020-2021 paper cut renewal with Rico at a cost not to exceed $2,500. We have the approval of an order with Zoom Video Communications for Zoom hosting services at a rate of $50 per host. We have the approval of the insurance proposals as listed in the agenda from Arthur J. Gallagher Risk Management Services Incorporated for the 2020-2021 school year. We have the approval of the lease agreement between Wallingford-Swarthmore School District and Trinity Cooperative Day Nursery to occupy a portion of the Swarthmore Rutledge School as stipulated. We have the approval of the facility usage and rental agreement between Wallingford-Swarthmore School District and Trinity Cooperative Day Nursery to occupy a portion of the Nether Providence Elementary School as stipulated. We have the approval of the resetting of fund balance commitment levels as described in the agenda. We have the adoption of the 2020-2021 final general fund operating budget in the amount of $87,226,990 funded by the following taxes: 48.3654 mils, Nether Providence, Rose Valley; 48.8121 mils, Swarthmore Rutledge; a 0.5% real estate transfer tax, $10 per capita tax for Nether Providence Township, $15 per capita tax for Rose Valley, Rutledge, and Swarthmore Boroughs. We have the approval of the 2020-2021 Homestead Farmstead Exclusion Resolution as authorized under provisions of the Homestead Property Exclusion Program Act, part of Act 50 of 1998, and the Taxpayer Relief Act, Act 1 of 2006. We have the approval of the resolution for the schedule of payment of real estate taxes for the 2020-2021 school year. We have the approval of the service agreement with the Chester County Intermediate Unit for one technology support generalist at the rate of $2,800 per week based on 40 hours per week. We have the approval of an independent contractor agreement with Deirdre Abramson to serve as the communications specialist for the 2020-2021 school year as stipulated. And we have the approval of the district to continue to use the existing signature stamp for the board secretary until a new one is received. The new signature stamp will reflect the name of the new board secretary. All of these items are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Kelly Walkman.
Thank you, Kelly. Do we have a second?
Second, Lawrence Cutis.
Thank you, Larry. Any discussion? All right, Michelle, can we take a roll call vote?
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Orsetti,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
aye,
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
aye from me, Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye. All right, the items pass 9-0. So that takes us to audience recognition for response to topics not on the agenda. As I mentioned earlier, members of the public wishing to address the board have been and continue to be encouraged to call 610-892-3470, extension 1102 to leave their recorded comments for the board, subject to a 3-minute time limit. The comments left prior to 5 o'clock today have been transcribed and made available to the board. And we will acknowledge at this time comments that are made for items not on the agenda. Again, any comments left after 5 o'clock will still be transcribed. 5 o'clock, but before the end of the meeting, will still be transcribed, distributed to the board, and made a part of the record, but will not be acknowledged during the meeting. Kelly, I believe we have at least one other comment, correct?
Correct. We have one other comment, and this comes from William Foster, Strathaven Avenue in Swarthmore, and his comment pertains to the plan for reopening schools. And he has 2 comments. And he states, though it's deeply fatiguing, we need to keep aware of the seriousness of the pandemic. We take risks every day in our lives, but the risks from the virus are greater than those we are typically willing to take. So the current best science is that about 0.5 to 0.7% of people infected die. Additionally, other serious, potentially lasting effects occur with strokes and damage to lungs and heart. But focusing just on death and infection fatality rate of 0.5% or 500 deaths per 100,000, that is significant. By comparison, something many of us think is dangerous, jumping out of an airplane with a parachute, historically has about 1 death per 100,000. Normally, none of us would ask our population to jump out of a plane once, much less about 500 times. A comparison closer to home is what we have done to save lives in respect to car crashes. Prior to the seatbelt laws, airbags, child car seats, age restriction, driver education, driving under the influence laws, crash test standards, we lost about 26 people per 100,000 of our population yearly. With all those interventions and others in road design and speed limits, we reduced the 26 deaths per 100,000 to about 11 deaths per 100,000 of population per year. That's a lot of effort over decades to save 15 lives per 100,000 per year. But I think most of us think that wearing seatbelts and using airbags was worthwhile. So 500 to 700 lives lost per 100,000 with the virus. The fatality risk is so much higher than that mitigated by seatbelts and airbags, et cetera. What this means is thinking through math and school openings and whether wind instruments and music rooms and lunchrooms and bus routes have capacity. It's all really important. Secondly, I think the focus of school reopening should be on building relationships between students and their new teachers, whether one-on-one by computer or 5 at a time in person, for some time for a few days outside. Somehow students and teachers need to know each other so that they can build a basis for subsequent online learning during the next school year. And that concludes his comment.
All right, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that comment. I think I'll just take this moment to say that, I think that as we move to a different phase to some extent around the restrictions that are in place in our area, in our county, we all feel the effects of being pent up for so long. And I know people want to get out of their homes and start to live a more normal life. But I think that comment, reminds us of some of the risks. And I guess my public health service announcement would be to continue to encourage people to socially distance and wear masks because it can make a big difference. And we want to keep the county in a good place so that the risk of bringing kids back to school is low. And so if the county ends up in a worse place over the next couple of months by people substantially modifying their behaviors, it may put us in a weaker position to be able to get kids back in the building. So that takes us to old business. Do we have any old business today? Okay. Do we have any new business? Okay, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.